Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to ASCA's 13th live session of Research Support Webinar Series 2021. I believe that everyone is excited to be here today and join this wonderful session. Before we start, we have some housekeeping rules. So I'm going to take you through our housekeeping rules and then we'll proceed. Okay, my name is Julia and I'm the marketing coordinator for ASCA. So I would like for everyone to please mute themselves to avoid background noise. And those who have any comments or questions, they can write in their chat box and then we will take it over from there. And again, if you would like to present your own question, you will be given the opportunity to do so only after the presentation. So we're not going to wait for any latecomers or anything. So we're going to proceed. Today we have our guest speaker, who is Prof. Olabanji Oni. Prof. Olabanji Oni is an expert in the field of business management. He has supervised master's and PhD students and published widely in the field of business management. His research areas are in finance, entrepreneurship, small business, leadership, and strategy. He is a co-convener for the International Conference on Business and Management Dynamics, as well as a reviewer and guest editor for various business management journals. He is a member of various committees in the university and has served in various leadership positions. Prof. Olabanji Oni, you can now take over. Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues and students who are here. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can, sir.
You can, all right. Welcome to collecting, analyzing secondary data, which is what I've got for you today. I will try to quickly take you in 45 minutes. And basically, in terms of our agenda, what I'm going to look at, it's simply detailed below. First of all, on our agenda, we've got what is secondary research data? Secondary research data.
Prof. Oni, sorry.
We'll also look at benefits of secondary data.
Hello, Prof.
We will
Oni. Can
move
you hear
into
me?
limitations of secondary data analysis, methods of using secondary data, how to get started when searching published sources of secondary data, steps for analyzing secondary data sources. We will also highlight softwares which can be used for secondary data analysis. And we've got a sort of a sample, which is a practical, just to see how the collection and analysis of secondary data is normally done. Here we're going to be using a panel data, just as an example. Now,
Prof. Oni,
what is the secondary research data?
Prof. Oni?
We see secondary research data as data which has been collected by someone else, which means this data is actually collected by someone else, and it's for a different purpose, which is simply not for your own purpose, except you now need to customize it. Normally, you will find books, journals, newspapers, university records, also records from government. All these are sources of food, especially during this research. Let's take a simple case in this situation, whereby if you are a researcher who is using a university record and you are simply going to research about why master students are failing their dissertations. The question to be answered here is, are you going to use a university record to find a solution to this? And is it going to give you sufficient information which you need for your problem statement and research questions? This is quite difficult because when you check with a secondary data, it's got a different orientation from your own research which you want to do. So normally, what you need to do is to first of all identify the previous data which has been collected by someone else has got a different orientation. It has got a different purpose. It has got to try to customize it to suit your research purpose. Now, in some situation, you will need to be able to find everything else and what you're trying to research on. So, which is a sort of finding a balance in terms of your secondary data. This aspect is very important, especially when it now goes to your data set and in terms of your sources of secondary data. It needs to suit your purpose of your own research. That is simply a point which I'm trying to emphasize, to say regardless of any type of secondary data you are going to collect, if it doesn't suit it, it means you won't achieve your objective. And it's better to simply modify and see how it can work for you as a researcher. Now you've got different sources that are based on, different sources. First, you've got your internal data sources. These are data which are collected from the researcher's company or institution. So you've got invoices or the revenues or the prices. You've got financial data, which will give you financial information in terms of the sales, in terms of revenue or expenses, profit, cash flow. You've got marketing data. You've got HR organization, which needs to be filled. These days, you've got your social media data, which you can also use. And also websites. So these are some which you could use. Apart from your internal data sources, you've also got your external data sources which you can use. And this is where you've got vendors which could customize. Vendors could customize and simply package the specific type of data which you are using, and then they can even actually sell it to you. Also, you've got government stats, which can also be used as an external source, newspapers, journals, books, radio programs, TV programs. Then you've got the international organizations like the World Bank, the IMF, OECD. You've got Bloomberg data, and also you've got the GEM data. All these are also important in terms of your different sources of secondary data. Now, apart from classifying your secondary data, which is based on internal or external, it can also be based on approaches. So you could do a classification of your secondary data on approaches. It means here you can classify in terms of quantitative secondary research data. Here you will see it means you will be looking at numbers. It means it has to be numeric in terms of the classification. For example, population census, health statistics of COVID-19, which we see regularly, almost every day, in terms of those statistics on COVID-19 from the different provinces, for South Africa as a country, or for a different country in Africa, or even in the world, we do get some of those stats. So all these are useful information which you do have in terms of your quantitative secondary research data. Also, you could get, which is in the transport aspect, by checking maybe number of flights, number of passengers, revenues from flights, which are all numeric information and will assist in terms of your quantitative secondary research data. Apart from an approach which is quantitative, you could take a different approach which is qualitative secondary research data. It means here, this is simply non-numeric, and you can get it from the newspapers, magazines, novels, interview, ethnographic photographs, documents, conversations, and so on. Your last approach which you can have is an integration of your quantitative and qualitative, which is a sort of a multimodal secondary research data. So this integrates these two aspects which I previously talked about. Now, when we look at secondary research data, it has also got its own benefits, which are sort of advantages we look at. First aspect I'm going to talk about is cost effectiveness. Unlike your primary data, whereby if you need to, first of all, design a questionnaire yourself, you need to go print it out. Some participants which you need to actually distribute your questionnaire to. Sometimes it can be a different location. You may need to travel, and then you may need accommodation. So all this type of cost you avoid. All right, you avoid this because you are using secondary data, which is already available, and it makes life easier, especially during this period of COVID, which I'm still specifying. You are able to enjoy now secondary research data. So I would advocate more of secondary research data, especially during this period of COVID-19. So that's simply an advantage we see in terms of saving costs, time, money, energy, and so on. Also, another benefit you can look at, or advantage, is a variety of available data which you have because of the different sources which we've talked about. We talked about those internal sources in the previous slide, and also external sources. So you do have a variety of available data. which can now be used, for your data set. So which is also one of the benefits. The next one is quality and also in terms of its accuracy. And if you check in here, you will see most big organizations. For example, if you get a secondary data, let's say from the World Bank, they've got dedicated officials who are responsible for collecting quality and accurate data about, it can be maybe information on GDP for the different countries in the world over different years. So the quality and accuracy of the secondary data is also quite good. So which is also one of the advantages or benefits you will find with getting secondary data. I have praised secondary data. Whatever has got advantages definitely has also got its own disadvantages. All right, so in terms of some limitations of secondary data, suitability of the data to your own research. This is the first slide which I talked about when we started with this presentation. The secondary data which you are going to use, is it suited for your own research? That is one aspect which we need to look at, because it's got a different orientation. Now there is a different orientation in terms of its purpose, in terms of its objective. Does this orientation, does it suit your own research? So this is simply where you need to try to strike a balance. And it becomes a challenge or a limitation if you are unable to find the secondary data which can actually be fit in terms of alignment with your objectives, as well as the purpose of your study, as well as to be able for you to be able to craft your research questions for your study, and also hypothesis if you are doing a quantitative study. Now, also, one limitation you will find is outdated data which may be available. What this simply means, we can have maybe the secondary data available, but maybe you are looking for a year, you're looking for 2020, but you go into the World Bank, for example, database, then you see only up to 2019. You could find a 2-year, gap in terms of what you want to do. So this is also a limitation which you will find with secondary data. One aspect is being able to find the specific period you are looking for. And sample bias, source bias are also part of its limitation. And also gaps, missing data in time series. Let's say you are doing for 10 years in terms of your number of years, which is the period. Let's say you're doing for 10 years, you can find maybe some years you've got gaps. So for example, you're doing a research on unemployment over a 10-year period for a particular country or for different countries, then you find gaps in some of those years. And how will you deal with that? So those are some of the limitations which you could find with secondary data. Okay, and also The last part is, are the data consistent and reliable? If not, the analysis will be wrong, which is quite true, because once you do not have a reliable data, then your analysis, which you would be having, will also be wrong, which is also one aspect we need to highlight in terms of its limitation. Now, methods of using secondary data analysis. It can be used alone. It can be combined with 2 or more data, or it can be combined with primary data analysis. If it's used alone, we can look at the example of a research which I mentioned from the beginning to say, why are master's students failing their dissertation? If it's combined with 2 or more data, then it means you can look at it in form of a relationship. Then you can form hypothesis and simply look at if there is a positive relationship between gender and master's students failing their dissertation. Alternatively, you can also combine it with a primary data analysis. It means you can actually do an interview with some master's students and also use university records. So you're using secondary data with a primary data where you simply do an interview. So these are simply methods of using the secondary data. How to get started when searching your published sources of secondary data. These are some of the steps. Applied it to the master's students. First is to identify what you wish to know and what you already know about your topic. For example, here we're saying master's students failing dissertations. That could be the problem we're looking at, what we want to know. Develop a list of key terms and names. It means here we will need to look at what are the key terms we can use. Master's students could be one, dissertation could be one, master's students failure rate. Okay, so those are key terms and names which we can use if we are looking at this type of research. Next is to search several general guides, directories, websites for papers or reports using the keywords in 2. It means when we do search, the keywords we would be using will be master's students, dissertations, or master's students failure rate. And then the literature, which is the step 4, which could be actually done. And then 5 is to consult the reference librarian, like if we do have university librarians for the university or in a respective faculty. We can also consult various directory guides like the faculty prospectus. And last step is to identify experts which are in those fields. You could consult some professors, research experts, and so on. So basically, this is how you get started. Now, if we move to step 4, analyzing secondary data sources, you've got 4 steps which are in here. First step, which is step 1, is to develop your research questions. If we need to apply the first case of this slide, it means we are going to say, why are master's students failing their dissertation? Okay, that becomes a research question. The next is to identify a secondary data set. It means I've listed various data sets here which could be applicable in terms of simply getting some of the information which you will need, using the information sources from university records, university Facebook's websites, radio, TV programs on postgraduate students, and so on. Then next step, which is step 3, is the evaluation of your secondary data set. When you do evaluate, then you will need to also check and answer some questions in terms of if the purpose of the study, what is the purpose of your study, who has collected the data, which measures were employed, and so on. And the last step is the preparation and analysis of the secondary data set. This part is quite important. And what you need to check, you check overall suitability, measurement of validity, and also you need to check your precise suitability to the research questions. And then you can do a cost-benefit analysis, which you can now check with your different alternative sources. So these are simply steps which can be employed when you're simply analyzing your secondary data sources. Now you've got different softwares which can be used for your secondary data analysis. You've got eViews, you've got SPSS data, you've got SAS, you've got R statistical software, NVivo, and MATLAB, and different aspects of software which you can use. But what I've used for the panel data, which I'm going to show you in terms of a practice, is the eViews. So we're going to go into the practical session now. Okay, the slide was just to give us some information from a theoretical perspective, and now we're going to apply in terms of practice. How do we do it? So if we, here I've put in one of my papers, which is on determinants of venture capital supply in sub-Saharan Africa. And like we mentioned India in terms of the software which has been used, here I've used eViews, okay, for the analysis. So what I've done is I've just highlighted some key aspects of this paper to give you a bit of background. And also in terms of a purpose is to determine variables which influence your venture capital supply in sub-Saharan Africa. And I've just stated only null hypothesis. Okay, normally if your study is, if it's a quantitative study, you need to state your hypothesis, your null as well as alternative hypothesis. But here I've only stated my null hypothesis. And I've looked at 6 variables which could influence venture capital supply as the determinant. First, I've looked at IPO, initial public offering. And next one, I've looked at market capitalization. Then I've also looked at unemployment. I've looked at FDI, foreign direct investment. I've looked at inflation. And then I've looked at trade openness. So I'm looking at each of these variables. How will it actually influence your venture capital supply? So these are stated looking at the null hypothesis. So null, we simply say no relationship when we state all our null hypotheses. So normally HO, but I'm trying to differentiate between the different HOs, HO1 down up to HO6, just to show the difference between the first null hypothesis and the last null hypothesis. If we do this, if we want to state the alternative now, then we will need to now say there is a relationship, okay? Then we can have H1 up to H6. But we need to be, we can make it directional and simply mention there is a significant relationship, for example, between IPO and venture capital supply. So that will be my H1. If I need to do my H2, then I can also say there is a significant relationship between market capitalization and venture capital supply. But now, what type of relationship? If I want to specify, then I can say positive relationship. So I can show I want as well. And this you will do for your alternative hypothesis. You can mention the relationship, or you can also show the type of relationship you're looking at. It can be positive or negative. For example, if I want to do for unemployment, it means stating my hypothesis. I can say there is a significant negative relationship between unemployment and venture capital supply. Then it will be my H3, and so on. Now, data sources. Where did I get this data from? World Bank Development Indicator and Prinkun database. Those were my sources for this data. The analysis, how did I analyze? I used the software like I said, I used eViews and analyzed using panel data of pooled, fixed, and random effects. Normally, the panel data, it's good because it integrates two aspects. It integrates time series and also integrates the cross-sectional dimension. So it means when we look at panel data, all we are saying is to say time series plus cross-sectional is equals to panel data. So because it integrates those two aspects, which is the time series and also the cross-sectional dimension. So now in terms of the countries which were selected, and this selection was based on availability of data. Ghana, Kenya, Mauritius, Nigeria, South Africa, Uganda, Botswana, Ivory Coast were selected based on availability of data. And, the period was for 10-year period. This was from 2006 to 2015. And for the observations in the panel, it means you take your time and then you multiply by your number of countries. So it means 80 observation. One of the advantages you will find with the panel data is the degree of freedom which you have, and you are able to also have with a small data, you can actually have the freedom to have a larger number of observation. For example, let's say I just add one more country, let's say two more countries here. It means I will be having 10 by 10. So my observations, just by adding two countries, I enjoy an increase from 80 observations to 100 observations. So, which is also one of the advantages you will find with the ways which this estimation can be done. The estimation, you will find OLS, but it's got its own disadvantages, which you wouldn't want to look into before you can now say you are moving into the panel data itself. So you could do estimations, and but what I focused on was to try to use pooled, fixed, and random effects in terms of the model. And the equation for pooled, if you have the YIT, your information which you have in here in terms of the YIT is to tell you about your dependent variable. So the YIT here is the dependent variable, which is the venture capital supply. And then you've got also your alpha, which is your intercept, and then you've got your beta, which is actually your coefficient of your independent variables. We've got various independent variables here, like the FDI. We've talked about trade openness, unemployment, all those independent variables. And then you've got your UIT. Here is your error term. But if you're using a pooled panel has got some limitations. It does not capture heterogeneity, which are the differences in the different countries. So it assumes all the 8 countries will be the same. So which is a challenge you find with a pooled panel. Now, due to this limitation of pooled panel, the equation is extended to look at a fixed panel. With a fixed panel, now we can see there is a difference. The difference simply comes when we look at the intercept. If you look at the alpha, you can see now you've got high with your alpha. So this is simply showing you now your cross-sectional aspect has been added to your alpha. So it means the intercept for all countries are different. So, which is also one aspect which has been taken into consideration. So apart from your fixed panel, you can move down, then you have your random panel. And what we need to check in here with the random panel is to check your error term. You see the UIT plus the sort of the EIT in there. So your error term has been adjusted. So, and your intercept doesn't have your high, which is for your different countries. So it's important to know, which is for the different years from 2006 to 2015. And finally, if to substitute each of those variables which we have for this research, so you replace your Y with your dependent variable, which is the venture capital supply, and then you bring in also log. It makes it also good. And then you bring in your independent variables for all your 6 factors, which can influence your venture capital supply. All these are your independent variables, which are your regressors here, from IPO down to trade openness. And then you put in your error time, which is the UIT plus the EIT. All right, now these are the parameters which have been estimated. And if we move on, now you need to choose. You need to simply choose an appropriate model. So what you need to do, for you to choose, for example, between the fixed and the random model, you need to do some tests. So the first test you do is to do your brush pigment test, which is the PB test, BP test. So if your p-value is significant, which means if it's less than 0.05, what you will do is to reject your null hypothesis and go for your fixed or random effect. And then it means we will leave out the pooled model, which we've talked about initially. So in this case, the p-value was 0.0000, 0.0000, which is 0, is less than 0.05. It means we now need to drop the pooled panel, and we now need to make a decision between fixed and random effect. So for us to make a decision between fixed and random effect in terms of a model which we're going to use, we run another test which is called Houseman test. Now, when we run Houseman test, we also need to check in terms of the p-value. Now, the decision for the Houseman test is if the p-value is greater than 0.05, if it's insignificant, we choose the random effect. But if the p-value is significant, then we use the fixed effect. In this research, the p-value was 33.8. It means 33.8 was greater than 5%. Then it means random effect model will be appropriate. So the output of the random effect model is presented, and when we look at all these factors, we will see in terms of it influencing venture capital supply. What we need to look at here, which is quite important, is we check in terms of the probability. Now, which is a p-value. If we check and read down, we will see 0.028 is less than 5%. The remaining factors or variables are greater than 5%. It means it's only market capitalization which is significant. So it means we can now make a conclusion to simply say market capitalization has an influence on venture capital supply, which means there is a significant relationship between market capitalization and venture capital supply. All right, that is simply a conclusion which can be reached. And then we can now say IPO, unemployment, FDI, inflation, trade openness does not have a relationship with venture capital supply. Okay. All right, I think I've tried to use my 45 minutes. I think I exceeded a bit. I will now wait for questions from some of you who are in this session.
Thank you very much, sir, for your very informative presentation. I would request for you to please switch on your video so that the audiences can see you. If possible, please switch on your camera so that the audience can see you.
Oh, all right. I'm struggling to hear you properly. It's fine.
Yes.
Can you see me now?
Yes, thank you so much for that.
Okay.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I would go straight to the questions now. We do have a few questions on the chat box. One is from Ida, which says, how did you select the sample size when using panel data?
How to select a sample size?
Yes, when using a panel data.
When using a panel data.
Yes.
All right. What you need to look at is you first of all, you've got two aspects here, your high and your T, all right? Your high is your cross-sectional dimension, all right? So which in this case, which I've looked at, my high was looking at the countries. So the 8 countries, so it means I've got 8 in there. Now, my T, which was my time dimension, it looked at a period of 10 years, which was from 2006 to 2015. Then it means now, for me to select, what did I look at? First, you can do it in different ways. First, you can look at availability of data in terms of the variables which you want to use, because the variables which I used, for example, I use FDI, unemployment, the venture capital supply, which was the dependent variable itself, trade openness. So you need to be able to know where are you going to be able to get the data for your variables. And then what you do now is you take those cross-sectional dimension, you multiply it by your T, you get your number of observation, which becomes now your sample size. So in my case, if I say T multiplied by I, I'm saying 8 multiplied by 10 countries. So I have 80 observations. So that becomes my sample in this situation. But it doesn't mean you have to make it 10 years. You can have 5 years. If you have 5 years, then you can increase. You can even increase your countries. You can increase it because you need to be able to have a sufficient number for you to be able to do a robust analysis. That is also one aspect you need to take into consideration.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I think I'm going to ask audience to please present their questions. If there's anyone who has a question, I see there's a hand from Simon Efandi. You can now present your question, sir.
All right. First of all, I want to say thank you for the presentation. And my question is, I'm trying to look back to data. One of the points you gave was that the source could be biased. And my question is, when we want to use secondary data, how can we tell that the source is biased vis-a-vis our research that we're trying to carry out?
My speaker is somehow is quite faint, but I'm assuming you are asking how do you know that you are using a credible source?
Exactly.
Is that what you're asking for?
Yes.
I'm trying
yes, how do we know that the source is credible? It's not biased.
Or the source is not biased?
Yes.
Okay. So for example, it means you need to check in terms of, for example, you need to check in terms of the credibility of the organization, which is one aspect. Also, you will need to check also from experience. And also you will need to check in terms of the various research which has been done. So it's important, for example, if you are using a source like a source from, let's say, World Bank, we know the World Bank then will normally have dedicated personnel who will be responsible, you know, for collecting and managing the data of the different countries in the world. And they will simply make sure that the data which is, you know, available are simply close to accurate. So you know that is a credible source, which is one example. Also, if you check with government statistics, for example, in South Africa, you've got Statistics SA, which we all know are responsible for quality and good, you know, research, which you can use the secondary data from. So credibility of the source goes also with the reputation, you know, of the institution which you are getting the data from, and also experience. Also, experience is important. You need to also check the different research which has been done and which source was used. So that could also inform you in terms of bringing in more credibility to the source which you are using for your secondary data.
Okay, Prof, just as I want to ask a simple follow-up to that question. Now, it goes, if we're going to use this information, this data from a secondary source, and the question is, can I validate or going to be able to need some official validation to be able to use this data?
I'm struggling to hear you, sorry.
What I'm saying, what I'm trying to ask is, if I want to use the data from this secondary source, can I validate the data myself, or must it be validated by an official source?
Or you're talking about evaluating the data yourself? Is that what you're talking about?
No,
Yes.
sorry, Prof. Oni is talking about validation of the data.
Okay, if you're talking about evaluation of the data, you before you do your analysis, there are different ways which you can actually use to do your data by making sure that you run different tests. You run different tests, and when you, for example, before you can run a particular data, you need to make sure that the data, there is stationarity. Then you need to run what we call unit root analysis on that particular data. Then if the data is stationary, then it's good for further analysis, okay? I'm struggling with hearing from my speaker clearly, but I'm trying to hear your questions.
Okay, Prof. Oni, I think the question was about the validation of the data, the validation of the data.
Please hold. Oh, yes, you can go ahead.
Okay, what I was saying, Prof, is what Simon was actually asking about was the validation of the data.
Some parts, and yes, they do.
Can you hear me?
I'm hearing faintly. Yes, you see, I'm trying to put my ears to the speaker. Yeah, just hold on.
Okay, I have a solution. You can also go
Hello?
onto the chat box. You can go to the
Hello?
chat box and you can see some of the questions there.
Okay. Okay, I got the question now. You're asking if you can validate this data by yourself, or if you can get maybe a professional body to validate the data for you. So in this type of situation, if for you to avoid bias, you see, it's good if you also get validation from outside. So that will also reinforce confidence in the data which you are doing. So it will allow you to also ensure that your data is not biased as well.
Mr. Simon, have you been answered for that question?
Yes, thank you so much for that response. I got it.
Oh, okay, thanks for that. We don't have any more questions from our chat box. I'm going to request if there's anyone within the audience to please state their questions. If there's anyone with a question. Okay, I don't see any hands except for Mr. Simon. Okay. Prof. Oni, I would like to thank you very much for the presentation on behalf of everyone who attended. It was a very insightful presentation, and I believe that everyone has been answered accordingly. And it was nice having you to present for us today. Thank you. And I would like to ask you if you have any comment or any remarks with the presentation that you have made. If you have any, you can go on, sir.
Thank you for the opportunity to present. Unfortunately, I'm struggling to hear you properly, but I'm sure you can hear me. And it's a good opportunity to be with colleagues and students and present. And we're looking forward to serve, especially masters and PhD students. And my advice to masters and PhD students is you need to do a lot of grounding on theory before you even go to analysis. So I wish you well with your studies, but do a lot of reading on theory before you start with your analysis, so that you know which models can you use, and how do you analyze, which ones are compatible, and so on. So I wish you well with your studies. Also, I would still like to talk to the masters and PhD students to say you need to pay attention and listen to your supervisor. We can come here, we can present and give you this information. It's not restricted to this. You are guided by your supervisor, so it's important that you pay attention to what your supervisor tells you to guide you with this process. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm here to serve. I'm a servant. I see you've introduced me, but I am simply a servant who is here to serve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Also, our audience would like to thank you. On the chat box, there's more comments which they are thanking you for the insightful presentation. And one said they love the practical part and it was very informative. So we would like to thank you very much for that. And as for everyone who would like to get the recordings for our sessions, we do have social media platforms. We have YouTube, we have Twitter, we have Facebook, and you can get all the recordings from those social media platforms. And also we have another session coming up on the 2nd of September. So be ready. On the 2nd of September, we are going to have another session for RSWS. And thank you so much for being part of this session. And we hope to see you again on the coming one. And thank you very much again, Prof. Oni. I don't know if Prof. Marcus Ambe would like to say a few words maybe before we close, or Prof. Marcus Ambe.
Thank you very much, Vinolia. We do appreciate your coordination of the program. Prof. Oni, thanks so much. In fact, The session was not only informative, but it was insightful. And I believe that it brought in a lot of practicals, which students will really consider and employing secondary sources of data in our research. Colleagues and fellow students, thank you so much for making time. It's always appreciative. We are here. The sessions will continue up to the end of the year. Just to bring to your attention also the fact that we are going to be having the second annual supply chain management visual summit, which is scheduled for the 5th of October. The event will cover the scope of the continent, and we're going to share practical insights on the supply chain practices and strategies across selected countries in the continent. We are going on the 31st of August, which is on the supply chain management game changer series with our esteemed procurement expert, Dr. Ted, who is going to look at a comparative analysis of selected public procurement laws in 6 countries in the continent. So we encourage you to follow the activities, and we thank you for being here. Thank you very much, Prof. Oni. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Vinoria.
Thank you very much, Prof. I believe that we have come to the conclusion of the session, and I hope that you join us for the coming Game Changer series as well as the RSWS session. Without any waste of time, thank you and have a lovely day further. Thank you. And bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.